And then after this, we'll do the next formal break.
Ed saw that I brought in a box of Tim Horton, so he shifted me in the schedule to have some Timbits just before the break. Major administrative decision at the time. Also, I guess we're just getting set up here, so
Aha.
there we are.
So we hit this. Now, you can just use keyboard.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. This is a presentation, I guess, that really it evolved when a couple of years ago, we thought we'd have a meeting in St. Catharines. For many, this is Tim Hortons. But I'm speaking to a SIHR group. Tim Hortons is somebody quite different. This is a bunch of hockey nerds that know who Tim Hortons is. But I think if you ask just about many people in Canada or United States, this is Tim Hortons. But a couple of years ago, when we were planning to have, or looking at having the meeting in St. Catharines, I remember when Tim Horton died in a crash. And it was on the QEW at St. Catharines. So there's a couple of links to Tim Horton to St. Catharines. And I want to introduce you to this afternoon to talk about Tim Horton briefly, to talk about his business ventures, talk about the crash, and then buying a Tim Horton franchise today and how much it would cost you if you went out and bought a Tim Horton franchise today. And you look back many years ago, I should have done that. So really, many in this group, gotta get over here. Oh, it seems to be stuck. Get it in. Did it what?
Letter in.
Oh, letter in.
Just skipped over.
Move the mouse. Move the mouse, you'll have some buttons that appear in the bottom left corner.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Same software?
Crazy looking.
What's the soft, is that a PowerPoint?
Yep.
Something else.
Oh, or what?
The arrows don't.
Here it is.
Oh,
Okay,
that's good.
we can stand here the whole time. Okay, so really Tim Horton was born in Cochrane, Ontario. You probably tell us where Cochrane is.
Yes.
Basically, Northern Ontario. His dad worked for the CN, and then he moved to Quebec for a couple of years, but the family moved to Sudbury. And he played some high school hockey. He played for Copper Cliff, a junior team, and then he was signed by the Leafs. He played a couple of seasons for St. Mike's, and then he attended the camp in 1949 in St. Catharines. He didn't make the team. He ended up, they sent him to Pittsburgh to play in the American Hockey League. So he played there basically for 3 years before he moved on to the Leafs. He played a few games for the Leafs as early as 1950, a couple of games in 51 or 52, but he really then made the Leafs organization in 1952. He played 24 seasons in the NHL. These are the teams he played. We'll tie in a few more a little later here, but he really played for the Leafs for until about 1970. And we always think that Tim Horton was a large man. He was actually 5'10", about the same size as I am. He was about 10 or 15 pounds heavier than I am. Just to give you some idea, but he was just a relatively small man, but he had great strength, and he's known for his strength and ability to play. You see, I put in a couple of notes here about all-star games. He was on first team, second team, number of times, but he was also a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs when they won the Stanley Cup. I put in this slide. This may be the hockey moment tonight. The magic moment for the Leafs if they were able to move on tonight. But I put in this photo because I know there are some Leaf fans in here. There are probably fans in here could name every player on this, in this photo.
6:30.
And probably somebody could name everybody from Kirkland Lake in the photo. So you know who all these people are. Well, in those early years in the 50s and 60s, players didn't make a lot of money playing in the NHL. It was a shorter season, so quite often they would have a summer job or some other entrepreneurial thing going on during the season. Well, Tim Horton worked for the Conn Smythe construction company in the 50s. He also liked cars. There's a story about Bobby Bond showed Tim Horton his Corvette. And Bobby and Tim was just fascinated by this new car. And Tim Horton always kind of enjoyed driving his Cadillac and his famous Sunbeam tanker car. Does everybody remember a Sunbeam tanker? Yeah, you gotta be old, don't you? Okay. Andre, are you old enough to remember that? Okay. So he really, because he enjoyed cars so much, in 1958, he formed a company with Fred Carr and they opened up a dealership in Willowdale, very close to where Tim Horton lived in North Toronto. And initially it was a gas station, a garage, and they sold used cars. But in 1961, Tim Horton started to sell Studebakers. There's the group, yes, I remember the Studebaker. His brother actually opened another car dealership up in North Bay. So that was his. Now it didn't last very long. The Studebaker ownership franchise only opened for a couple of years after it folded. So, but then a couple of stories. Tim Horton then got into the restaurant business, and he met this one fella here, Jim Sherrod, and Jim owned a donut store in Scarborough, Ontario. It was at Lawrence and Warden area, kind of northeast Toronto. And that franchise was struggling a bit. And he had a great idea. If I get a big name like Tim Horton, I may be able to sell more donuts. So they formed a company. You can see here, Tim and Jim Limited was their restaurant business. Now, it wasn't donuts. There's some story. Well, how did he meet Tim? Well, apparently Tim got his famous brush cut at the store next to Your Donuts in this mall. And there is another story out there that Jim actually bought a car from Tim Horton. So they kind of knew each other. And so I guess really started, Jim thought, well, maybe I get a big name for a restaurant. Well, Tim Horton, he wasn't too sure about this donut stuff. So what he did, he formed another restaurant. So the two of them had a series of burger restaurants, burger drive-ins. And they had a number of these in the Toronto area, but they also had one in North Bay. So this photo is number 7 burgers in North Bay. And they were, we're looking at probably the early 60s. Now, does anybody remember having a burger at number 7? No, did you want it? Okay. I remember having a burger at the Tim Horton restaurant. Well, this restaurant struggled. And then Jim talked to Tim and said, maybe we should be making donuts. So they opened a restaurant in Hamilton. The first Tim Horton donut restaurant was in Hamilton, Ontario on Queen Street. And Jim had acquired some property. It was an old Esso gas station and tore it down and built this first restaurant in Hamilton, Ontario. So this is where it started. Now, it struggled, but one of the part owners of this was a fellow named Ron Joyce. Ron had set up, he was a policeman in Hamilton. He'd actually invested in a Dairy Queen restaurant just the year before, but he also invested in this. Well, this place struggled a bit. It struggled. Tim Horton was kind of it's almost like a ghost owner. He was there, but really not there that much. Jim was kind of running this restaurant. And actually, a couple of years later, after it formed, and this is a kind of interesting date trivia for you. May 17th, 1964 is when this restaurant opened as Tim Horton Donuts. So we're leading up to what's that, how many years? Okay, there you are. Okay, just to keep the audience, the mask skills up. Okay, so this opened, and a couple of years later, because it was struggling, Jim sold his shares, his part of the restaurant, to Tim Horton. At that time, it was 6 donut shops in the Hamilton area. He sold it for $10,000. Well, about that time, Ron Joyce said, I'd like to come in and become a little more, invest a little more in this particular restaurant. So in probably early 1967, these two, Tim Horton and Ron Joyce, formed a partnership. And that's when things happened in the donuts business. Ron Joyce he retired from the police department or stepped aside and really became the manager of the Tim Horton Donut organization. So you've got a little bit of that. We'll come back to that story a little later. Now, I said Tim Horton, he played for the Leafs until about 1970. And then he was traded to the New York Rangers. He played there for a little while. And then in the 1971 interleague draft, he was picked up by Pittsburgh. So he played 1 season for Pittsburgh. He was, in 1972, he went into the interleague draft again, and Punch Inluck remembered him from the Toronto Maple Leaf era and acquired him and signed him for the Sabres. And so he played that 71 season, 72 season with the Sabres. It was the first time that the Sabres actually made it to the playoffs. Tim Horton was a leader of the team. His leadership, and you see it, he's getting a little older in his career, but he was a key part of that particular team. Well, Punch Inluck said, well, I'd like to sign you to a contract extension for the next year. So following the season, following that 72 series, he signed Tim Horton again. But part of it was, I'm going to give you a car as part of the contract. And this is the car that Tim Horton got when he signed the contract. The Pantera. It's an Italian car, mid-engine. It's worth about $17,000 in the early 70s. Now, do you remember your car you had in the early 70s and how much it cost you?
$1,200.
Okay, I think I have a Datsun 240Z about the time, $3,000. So this was an expensive car, Well, moving through the story here now, Tim Horton, with the Sabres, played against the Maple Leafs on this date, February 20th, 1974. The Leafs won. Tim Horton didn't play the third period. He had a jaw and an ankle injury. Didn't play the third period, but he was named as one of the 3 stars of the game. Well, what happened after the game? Well, because he was such a veteran, Punch Inluck, I guess he had his car in his Pantera in Toronto. After the game, he said, "Oh, I'll drive my car back to Buffalo." Well, on the way, he stopped in at the headquarters of Tim Hortons in Oakville, Ontario. That was Ron Joyce. They talked about a number of things. But Tim, I guess, had been drinking, or maybe there's some medicine or treatment he'd been taking because of his injury. Ron was reluctant to let him go on, said, well, stay the night here, Tim. You're not in good shape to drive. I guess he's been drinking and whatever, so they're a little concerned about him. Tim said, no, I'll be fine. So he headed on from Oakville down the QEW on his way to Buffalo. Well, as he approached St. Catharines, there's the QEW. As he approached St. Catharines at the Lake Street access on the QEW, his car went out of control, crossed into the median, and flipped over several times. It ended up in the westbound lanes, so it flipped several times. They actually found Tim Horton probably about 35 meters from his car on the QEW. They rushed him to the hospital, and he died in the St. Catharines General Hospital. Now, 10 years later, the investigation took place, an autopsy took place, but 10 years later, they released the results of this. They found that the car was in good working condition before the crash occurred. They also found that his blood alcohol level was twice what the legal limit was at the time. And the estimated he was traveling at about 175 kilometers per hour, about 110 miles per hour. So he died. Now, Tim Horton, a few years later, he was put into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And a couple of years ago, when they identified the top 100 players to recognize the 100th anniversary of the NHL, Tim Horton was one of those 100 players. So now, after the death, Ron Joyce bought out Tim Horton's share, or his family, out of the shares, and it for $1 million. At the time, there were 40 franchises across Canada, primarily in Ontario. So that was very controversial. If you remember, there was a legal case brought by his widow several years later that said that he didn't pay enough, and the courts found that $1 million was a proper payment. So today there are almost 5,000 Tim Horton donuts shops in the world. This many in Canada, 800 in the United States. It's been through several different ownership type things, but it is a big organization now. Now if you're heading back towards Toronto, you can stop in Hamilton and go back to the original site of the Tim Horton first shop. They've since rebuilt it. If I go back, that house is still here. But it's on Ottawa Street. There's actually a small little museum of Tim Hortons, but that's the first one.
The big statue.
And there's a statue of Tim Horton on the side, I think, isn't it? Okay. Now, Ron Joyce, he sold out his part of the Tim Horton organization in '96. He sold it to the Wendy's hamburger group. And now it's been through a number of others. I think it's back to some Canadian or Burger King was part of it. Hard to keep track of all the letters and everything now. Now you're probably wondering, what if I invested in a Tim Horton donut shop way back in the '60s? Well, you probably wouldn't be at this meeting. Here's how much and there's a process. You can go onto the Tim Horton website now, and there's quite an elaborate process to get a Tim Horton franchise now. You have to have a net worth, but your investment in Canada, this is how much a Tim Horton franchise you expect to pay today. And then there's a whole bunch of ongoing fees, the royalties for advertising, contributions and maintenance and whatever. So anyways, there is the Tim Horton story. I'm going to pass around, if you've never seen a Tim Horton Timbit, this is your chance. Enjoy Tim Horton Timbit. Is it for the break, Ed? I mean,
For the break.
break next, but put it out there. Okay, put it out there. Tim Horton Donuts. Tim Horton, the famous Timbit.
Yeah, Bill, actually, a two-level question. Interestingly enough, the incumbent president of the Tampa Bay team, who the Leafs are playing tonight, a guy named Steve Griggs, originally worked for the Minnesota Wild. And I knew him to some extent. And I recall in a conversation with him commenting that his father had something to do with the early establishment of this company. Now, did that name enter into your research at all, Griggs?
There were so many franchise owners. I think when Jim and Tim set up, they really looked at the franchise possibilities. And so they would franchise out. And so he could have been an investor of franchise as it built.
So potentially that's.
Yes, they sure could have.
Okay, the other thing, I was surprised to see that there are 800 in the US, because I will say in Minnesota, they have failed miserably. We had one fairly close to the Excellency Center that failed, one in Hopkins that's failed. I think there's been one up on the Iron Range that failed, but yet it seems to work elsewhere. Any theories on this?
Yes, it's several in Michigan. And in Ohio, the Ohio stuff was set up a lot because of Wendy's. So they have a Wendy's and Tim Hortons almost like side by side. And then it's been in a lot of universities. Michigan State, several of the Michigan universities, but places close to Canada seems to be. I know when I first moved to Hope, Michigan, I contacted to see how much it would be to get a franchise in Hope, Michigan. And I don't think I could sell that many donuts.
I still don't, sorry for a little bit of an anecdote. I don't understand how Tim Hortons is doing so well in West Virginia. Like that state blows my mind.
Yeah, so quick question and a small anecdote. Are you familiar with the Tim Horton interview from the '68 Bruin Leaf game where he talks all about Tim Hortons?
I'm not, but you can tell us about it.
Oh, no, I have it. In fact, I think you can get it on YouTube if you know what the game is, but
Yeah.
it's an intermission video where he's in Leaf uniform, all sweaty.
Oh, yes.
And he's doing a whole picture.
Yes.
Tim Hortons stuff. So
And that's what he was doing. That's the name part of it.
the anecdote quickly, if you've ever been to a country outside of North America where there's Tim Hortons, it is a high-end restaurant. Like surprisingly, I've been to one in the Philippines, in Manila, and nobody there knows who Tim Horton is, or is associated with hockey, or anything like that. They take dates there. It's like,
Yes.
I'm going to Tim Hortons, which is kind of funny.
Well, I take my wife to Tim Hortons all the time.
It's a date. It's like, I'm trying to impress a girl. We're going to Tim
Well, I'm
Hortons.
impressed. I'm impressing her too.
Our girl's trying to impress her.
Yes.
How much money did they Ron Joyce in '96?
Well, good question. I don't know. I can't remember. I've dug up stuff more than a million that time. And you see how many restaurants were. But I can't remember how much it was.
It's a firm, a big firm that owns it now. And they've changed their culture altogether.
Yes, I think that also the thing that has changed with Tim Hortons is that many of the initial ones, the baker was right on site.
Yeah.
And a major change they made was centralized baking places, and you'd sell them at small little organizations, and they would ship things in. But before they made that change, the baker was that had the power. And now they've changed the way they operate. They have centralized kitchens that they ship all the stuff.
And the company that makes the donuts is not Tim Hortons.
It may not be.
It's
A
another
lot of
company, it's an
changes.
Indian company.
Yeah, a lot of changes taking place with these different ownerships.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, when you're talking about frying up the donuts, that was amazing. I grew up just east of Toronto, in Ontario, and there was really nothing sort of at the west end of Pickering, right? So this guy named Bobby Vaughn came in And he opened up a Timmy's.
Yep.
Everyone thought he was nuts because there's nothing up there. Like, you know what there was up there? Construction and construction workers coming in from all over. So at the corner of White's and Highway 2, if anyone's familiar with the area, he started up a business. And at one point, for my work there, and she was a huge talking family, so she stuck off the flow. I had some like powers that you gotta come up here, because Bobby Vaughn was out there, he had a generator. Got the generator, hooked up fryers, and while everyone else has a power out, he's out there literally frying up the donuts. So I've had my donuts personally cooked by Bobby Vaughn. It was a brilliant business deal for him at one point, him and his wife owned cheese and Hickory candy jars. Right, the one right by the train station.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, appreciate it. We'll take a break until 3:35. This coffee.